All right, let's get started. So this webinar today, this is a live webinar. After I'm done, we'll take questions. But this is actually, in my opinion, one of the more important webinars that you may listen to. And I'll tell you why. And it's because lots of attorneys, meaning thousands that I encounter every year, are having or have a difficult time getting a job in one market. And then by opening themselves up to searching in other markets, are able to get jobs there. And I'm having sent around sometime during this meeting, a bar reciprocity guide that I prepared for everyone to review for if you are admitted to the bar, like how you can go to other bars. There's also a very popular article on BCG about it. But as a general rule, it's very important to look at other markets in your search. And if you don't look at other markets in your search, you're really in a lot of trouble. And I'll give you a couple of examples that are personal to me about when I was searching for a position, both as a law student and then as an attorney. So as a law student, I'd gone to college in Chicago and I wanted to work in Chicago when I was in law school. The law school I went to only had 4 or 5 firms that came on campus. And I got interviews, got to the second round, didn't get an interview. So then I had to look at the firms that did come to my law school, which was on the East Coast. And so I was getting all these interviews in Washington, D.C., and New York and places like that. So I ultimately went to New York, which is good because if I put all my eggs in one basket and tried to work in Chicago, I would have had a lot of problems and not get jobs. And sometimes the markets closest to you, or there's certain markets that are much easier to get positions in than others. After I graduated from law school, I did a clerkship in Michigan for 1 year for a federal judge. And when the clerkship was coming, when it was half over, I applied to firms in Detroit. And at that time, there were only maybe 4 or 5 big law firms that paid kind of market rates, which weren't even like New York market rates. There were different rates. They paid kind of Midwestern market rates. And there were like 4 or 5 firms. And I thought I'd stay in Detroit. But instead, I got maybe 1 or 2 interviews. Actually, I got 3 or 4 interviews in all the firms. But the problem that I was having was they didn't really have any work. They didn't have enough work. It was during a recession. Detroit was a city and the whole market was going downhill. So I got I didn't get rejected, but I got told, we'll call you if we have work and that sort of thing. And wasn't able to essentially get a job, even though I was clerking for a federal judge in that city. So then what I did, I sent applications to big firms in Los Angeles, where I thought would be fun to work. And then I also sent stuff to New York. I was very surprised about Los Angeles. I got, maybe 10 or 12 interviews with major firms. And in New York, I got interviews too. But a lot more activity in California for some reason, because obviously the California economy was doing much better than Detroit. And so that's where I ended up. So if you look at other markets when you're searching, it could change your life in the course of your career. Because if I just wanted to stay in Detroit, I would have had to take a job at not a very good firm, and which didn't, to me, make a lot of sense when I could work at a big firm in New York or something. If I had stayed in New York, I might not have been happy with the hours and the commutes and that sort of thing. So you have to really look at other markets in your search. It's one of the most important things you can do. I have candidates all the time that are laid off from or fired from big firms. It could be in Atlanta or San Francisco or wherever, and have a very difficult time getting interviews in those markets because there's so many attorneys competing for the same jobs. The law firms that they want to work at would just prefer someone that's employed. But then they start looking at smaller markets, and all sorts of great things start happening to them. They look at 5 interviews in Tennessee. They'll get 8 interviews in Cleveland they've never been to. They get all these interviews, all these different places, and it really changes the course, can change the course of your life. Before I get started with the webinar, I'll tell you one funny story. I had a candidate at one time that he was in West Texas, it's like when you think of Texas with tumbleweeds and things blowing around. And he decided that he wanted to work in a city where he could go hiking, where he was just completely flat. And he'd never been to a city where he could do hiking, but he thought he would go to Portland or something like that. And so he decided that he wanted to apply to firms in Portland and Denver. And he was a patent attorney working at a 3-person law firm and making very little money, and probably the equivalent right now, $70,000 a year, something like that, when big firms would be paying right now over $200,000 for. And so he told me to apply to firms for him in Portland and Denver. And the first call he got was from a firm from the Portland firm said, we don't have any openings in Portland, but we have an opening in Pittsburgh. And we'd love to talk to him in Pittsburgh. And this guy had never been out of West Texas. He'd gone to school in Texas. Maybe he'd been other parts of Texas. He got to school in Texas for college. He'd gone to law school there. And so all his background was in Texas. He'd literally never left Texas. So he decided to go interview with this Pittsburgh firm. He got on a plane and flew into Pittsburgh. He arrived at night and basically took a taxi to the hotel. The hotel was in the same building as the law firm. And so he got up in the morning, went up in the elevator, interviewed with the law firm all day, and then got on a plane and went home. And then the firm offered him this incredible salary of, I don't know, it was like the equivalent of $50,000 a year. So they quadrupled the salary to what he was making. And he couldn't believe it. And his wife couldn't believe it. And so they moved to Pittsburgh. The first thing he did was he bought a brand new Suburban, which I guess was popular for people in Texas. And then they started raising chickens in their backyard of a rental house. But it was pretty funny. But the point is that he's a partner in a major firm now, and I think Philadelphia, like a big time partner. And his entire life changed just by looking at these other markets. It's incredible. Like everything can change for you instantly if you look for other markets, and your whole life and career can change. And so many people are like, I remember when I was applying people have prejudices against different markets. So they may think, oh, LA is all plasticky and the people are fake. But there's probably 100 different neighborhoods with different personalities in LA. Or people think New York's too hectic, or they think, I don't know, Cincinnati's too slow. But if you look at other markets, you're going to get more jobs. You're going to find people that are interested in you. You're going to apply to places where there's opportunity, and it's going to change your life. It's that simple. Again, like I have so many people that come to me and they're in one market, they're not having any luck, and they decide to look at other markets and everything completely changes for them. And this is really one of the most important pieces of career advice I can give you. Now, there's certain markets that are very difficult to work in if you don't have the bar, for example. I got a job in California because I told the firms that I would take the bar right before I sent out because I was in clerkship, I hadn't taken the bar yet. I told them I would take the California bar, and so they gave me interviews. And then but there's certain markets like Florida and California where the firms are not interested in you if you don't have the bar. But a lot of markets, they definitely are. Let me just show you. Here we go. So again, relocating, I just want to stress this to you at the beginning. I'll talk about different practice areas. I'll talk about different markets. But relocating is crazy. It's such an effective way to get ahead in your career. Another example I'll tell, this is recently, I had a candidate in Denver or not even Denver, like someplace like Aspen or Vail, where there weren't a lot of jobs, that decided they wanted to relocate to some town where their parents had moved in Wisconsin, like a very small town. And I thought, there's no way that this person's going to get any interviews, but I'll try them. And so they ended up getting 3 job offers in this kind of rural county in Wisconsin. And obviously they got to move to their family, and it just, all this stuff is just, it's profoundly helpful for you if you can relocate and look at other markets. And there's different ways how you should package yourself when you're trying to relocate to markets. But in general, it's incredibly important, because if you're just banging down the same doors and you're in the city you're in, or you're not having any luck, it could be that there's too many attorneys. It could be that the economy is slow there. It could be that, who knows? There could be lots of reasons that your market's slow. And so if your market's slow or you're not making any headway, maybe the industries are changing, maybe, who knows? But if that's the case, then look elsewhere. That's really one of the most important pieces of advice I can give you. You have to look at other markets, because some markets are dying for attorneys. If during an economic boom, if you're trying to, it's just, there's so many ways to get ahead by relocating to other markets. And just a final point I'll make is this is definitely what I would consider, at least in the large law firms and most of their practice areas, not all, a slowing legal market. You may be hearing about all these tech companies laying people off, interest rates rising, like all these things that are happening. People that are in the firms and in the companies will basically not talk about it. They'll try to be like, oh, everything's okay. But to some extent, that may be true for some people, but it's actually a pretty bad economy right now. And the strength that you have is being able to look at other markets. One example would be a lot of people work in big cities and then they commute to suburbs. Most suburbs all around the country have law firms. And so they never think of looking for jobs in the suburbs where they work or other suburbs. They only look in the big cities. And therefore, if you look in the suburbs, you're often going to be very surprised how many opportunities there are. And then when you look in the big markets, after the market picks up, you're going to be able to move back to a big market. So people just don't think about this. This is pretty much what relocation material is. Lawyers who move can be very attractive to different markets. Should be pretty obvious. They can be appealing. The making moves, if you're moving, can be helpful. One of the things that I'll talk about a little bit is the fact that when you relocate to certain markets, there's certain markets where you're going to have a lot more luck rather than less luck. So when I talk to BCG candidates, it's always about things where you've lived before, where you've grown up, places where your brothers and sisters may live, or your places where you grew up part of your childhood, or where you graduated from high school, or where you went to college. I mean, places that you have some sort of connection to are always important. So that's just something to think about. You should write down the areas where you feel like you might have a connection. It doesn't matter 100%. It's not firms will still hire if you don't have a connection, but they're going to be much more cautious with you if you don't have a connection. But if they need the person, then that's what they'll do. What's interesting too, just before I get started with this, in a lot of professions, engineers, doctors, just all sorts of different people. If you're a doctor and you'll be sent to a residency wherever, people move all the time. So attorneys should too. You shouldn't feel bound to one market. You should always be interested in working in other places, because if you work in other places, you may have more opportunities. It's just absolutely mind-boggling to me, the success stories that I've seen from people that are willing to relocate to other markets. It's actually crazy. There's been so many lives that I've seen change for the better. And when I say change for the better, I'm talking about people that I placed 20 years ago that are like big partners in law firms that they relocated to, or broke off and started their own firms. And now there's 50 people or 100 people in the firms. It is really an exciting thing. And it's exciting, I think, moving to a new city, because you're meeting new people. You have a chance to learn from all your mistakes in the past and grow in a different way as a different person, have a different brand with people. You're starting fresh, and any attorney can relocate to different markets, with the exception of California and Florida for the most part. But there's tons of different markets you can work in. And a lot of people do relocate to a lot of different markets. Some people start their careers in New York, and then they'll move to Miami, and then they'll move to Texas. And that is a fun thing. You can get insight into different markets. You can also many times pick up and move to other continents or countries. I've placed people that were at a big firm, Houston, doing project finance, and all of a sudden they're working in Hong Kong, or a corporate capital markets attorney working in San Francisco, and then all of a sudden they're in London or Dubai. It's just, there's so many opportunities that you get when you're working and able to look at other markets that you just don't get otherwise. I had a case not too long ago where I was working, there was an attorney that had been at like a big firm, I think like Skadden or Simpson Thatcher, something like that. And he was like, I don't know, like an 8th or 10th year. He'd gone to a really good law school, and the firm just was like, hey, we don't have any work for you anymore. And he took some time off, and because he couldn't find a job, and he spent a couple of years just not able to find a job. One of the first things he did was he was like, okay, I can't find a job. And this is a really smart guy. He went to, I think, Chicago, Stanford, something like that for law school. And he couldn't find a job. So he decided he was going to take some classes and apply to medical school after he took the required classes and the MCATs. He did really well. He was a smart guy. And all the medical schools rejected him, basically because they don't like second career people, I guess he said. And so then he took a job as a bartender, and he was doing that for a couple of years. So he hadn't practiced in 3 or 4 years. And then one day, this position came up in someplace weird, Saudi Arabia, or maybe it was Dubai, I don't know, or Qatar. But anyway, this position came up with a big English firm in one of those cities. And he applied to it and got it. And it was really well paying, and it was able to keep his career. So just the idea, like, you're unemployed, you can't find a job. And he was in international arbitration, which is kind of a practice area where there's not often a lot of opportunities. And it's just very competitive because there's so many people from other countries trying to, and anyways, but he was able to just change his life around and get a job in another continent. And he actually liked moving there. So this can really change your life. And it says here for excellent attorneys for relocation, it doesn't really matter what type of attorney you are. You can be a family law attorney. You can be an insurance defense attorney. You can relocate to different markets. Now, there's some exceptions that I would say, and I know a lot of times there's foreign attorneys on these calls, and it's very difficult for someone to apply to a law firm from a foreign country and get a position there in the U.S. because there's just a million different reasons, which I've covered in other articles, but it's just pretty much U.S. employers prefer U.S. trained attorneys because they're likely to stick around and be committed. If they hire a foreign attorney, there's visas, and anyway, you get the idea. But when the law firm's interviewing you to move to a different market, they need to understand like why you're going there. What is it about the firm that's special, and what do they think is going to make you stay there? When I was applying to firms in California from Michigan, whatever search I ran also included Fresno, California. And Fresno is this very hot region of California that a lot of people are not interested in living in. But I'm not criticizing Fresno, but there's just not. I think it might be like an agricultural town or something. Anyway, so I applied to some firms in Fresno by mistake. And the calls I all got were like, why would you ever want to come here? And I didn't really have an answer. Whereas if you're applying to like Los Angeles or San Diego or Bay Area, like people think you want to be there. So you have to have some sort of reason that you want to be in a region, because if you don't, then the law firms are just going to think you're going to leave. So they like it when law firms like things when people buy houses. They like it when their family's there. They like it when their spouse is from there, or they have kids. I don't know, but there's always different reasons that you should try an area. And you have to, most employers, not all, but a lot of them are going to ask, why are you interested in this particular region or this particular area? They don't ask that so much in places like New York and Washington, D.C., Chicago, like your big cities, because they're all like thinking that, oh, everybody would want to live here. So there's no question. But in the smaller markets, they're definitely a lot of times going to ask that. So I'll talk a little bit about today some of those that have the most success and those who don't. A lot of this is geared towards moving between large law firms because this is based on an older presentation. So I'm going to talk about smaller firms as well, large firms. The majority of attorneys, by the way, are with smaller firms. That I think is also very relevant. And also we talk about markets that are likely to be receptive, and then just the idea of how many jobs are available in different markets, and then the factors that drive if you're able to get a job in a certain market. Meaning, some markets are very active, some markets are very slow. At certain times, for example, the Bay Area has been incredibly active, and anybody that was a corporate attorney at a functioning law firm, meaning 3 or 4 people, could get a position in most firms. Maybe not the best firms, but pretty much a very good selection of firms in the Bay Area. So a lot of these are just things that are beyond your control, and then it's something that you should understand. And one of the things that I've noticed that's also very interesting, and this is an important point to consider, is when you're relocating to a different market, there's a couple of things that are interesting. It's actually, in my opinion, easier to get a position in another market, and it's much easier if you have your family or something's there, or your spouse is from there, when you're looking to another market. Because a lot of times when you're looking for a job, say you're in Chicago and then you want to work at another firm in Chicago, the problem with that is the law firms are going to assume that maybe you're not doing good work, or maybe you're having problems, maybe you don't get along with people. Maybe if they hire you, you won't be loyal because you're not loyal to your current firm and you're moving. So all these kind of questions and doubts come in their mind. And maybe they know people at that firm, at the firm you're at, and they don't like them, or they've had a bad experience with attorneys. All these things are going through their mind. But when you're relocating, there's none of that. It's like, I'm from this area, or I really want to work here. If you're at a firm, say in New Jersey or Virginia, and you want to relocate to New York, the New York firms are like, of course he wants to be in New York. There's not even any question that they'd want to be in this bigger market. It's so much more sophisticated. This is how people in New York think. But if you're relocating, if you say you're in Richmond and you want to go to another Richmond firm, there's going to be all this kind of suspicion about why you're moving, and not that they won't hire you, but it's a little bit harder because there's a lot more questions asked, and you just have to be prepared differently. And firms tend to be a little bit more open when you're not from an area because they don't have those questions. I think that's the psychological reason for it, but I've seen a lot of this happen. This is an example. It's an old example. I apologize, but it's interesting in California. This example still holds for corporate related work. Los Angeles it's not the biggest market in California. There's things that don't happen a lot there, like capital markets. A lot of the law firms, the people do multiple different types of corporate work as opposed to being very specialized. It's just not as sophisticated as a market in a lot of cases, the Bay Area. So there's a lot more demand for corporate attorneys in the Bay Area than there is in Los Angeles. So if you're in Los Angeles and you're applying to jobs and not getting a lot of luck, that would probably be a lot different if you're going to the Bay Area, where there tends to be much hungrier in the right economy. So in contrast, it's very interesting. If you're a litigator in the Bay Area, you'll have a harder time probably getting a job there than you would in Los Angeles because there's more demand for litigators. And so there's just a lot of things going on here in the background that you have to understand that have to do with economies, the size of the market, the demand, and everything. And so there's just a lot of factors. I'll cover some of these factors today. One of the factors is the type of attorney you are, meaning what practice area are you in, what's your seniority level, where you're relocating, is there demand in the market that you're going to, do they have a shortage of attorneys like you, do they need people with your background, and that sort of thing. The first one, of course, is the type of attorney you are. This is going to affect your success. It shouldn't just be moving to a different state. It should be moving to a different city. But different types of practice areas are in demand at different points in time. Sometimes your practice area is in demand. Other times it isn't. An example would be data privacy. Like that became like this thing that everyone wanted to do. And it became very popular recently. Now I hate to say it if you're a data privacy attorney, but there's many more attorneys than there's more people that want to do it than there are opportunities. So people went and got these privacy certifications and everything. And in terms of law firm jobs, there's definitely not as much opportunity as there was in-house. It's certainly an active practice area. But your demand for your practice area is just very important because different practice areas are active. The example I gave you of the person relocating from Denver to this small area, or maybe it was Denver, no, it was Vail or Aspen, to a county in Wisconsin, was a family law attorney. And they just didn't have enough of them, and everyone was getting divorced there. It depends on what's going on. So the first thing is like litigators. Litigators are always in demand at some point in some place at a big firm or a small firm. There's just a lot of litigation work out there. It's the most popular practice area. It's what people learn to do in law school. And that's pretty much what the majority of people are doing. But it's more difficult for litigators typically to relocate because you have local rules and there's relationships with other attorneys and judges. And so it's a little bit more difficult for litigators to relocate. Most of the relocations that I'm involved in are people in transactional practice areas, meaning corporate, patent, real estate, things like that, where it's a little bit different. And there's not as many of the attorneys that do that. And because there's so many litigators, there's not as much interest or pressure to hire them necessarily. Because there's just a lot of them around. Corporate attorneys are one of the most marketable practice areas. All forms of corporate transactional work, when the economy is good, you pretty much can relocate to most other markets if you're a corporate attorney in a good economy when corporate's in demand. The reason that is because it's interesting. So during slow economies, they don't hire a lot of corporate attorneys. They don't train a lot of corporate attorneys. So the ones that are able to get jobs or stay employed during bad economies with 2, 3, 4 years of experience, suddenly when the economy improves, are almost like golden and walking on water because there's so few of them. During economic expansions, corporate attorneys are in demand everywhere because there's deal activity. So you could be a corporate attorney in Buffalo, New York, and you could relocate to Los Angeles. This is really how it works. And and even other areas of the world, if you're in capital markets, not so much like regular types of corporate, but just a very marketable practice area. The problem with corporate, though, is when the market slows down, like it is now, corporate attorneys have a difficult, if not impossible time in some cases finding jobs. You've had your periods like 2000 to 2001, 2008 to 2011. Then you now have 2022, so there's 2023. So it goes through these expansions that typically, historically, if you were to track this back to the 1970s, when every 8 years, just like their corporate attorneys are like fleshed out, and then it's not always 8 years. Obviously, 2011 to 2022, 23 is more than that. But you had other things going on in that period, the government pumping money into the economy and during COVID and that sort of thing. One of the tips for moving into a new city is just to think about is the more specialized your practice area is, the more likely your skills are to be transferable and the more marketable you'll be. It's always fun for me when I get senior attorneys. So you might have a senior attorney, literally 60 years old or 65 years old, getting laid off or pushed out of a big law firm or a small law firm, whatever, and having some special skill with some weird type of patent prosecution or some type of corporate transaction or some type of real estate, it doesn't matter, some type of food and drug law. And so these people start looking for positions. And all I have to do essentially is figure out what their expertise is. It's very rare, type it into our database and pull up firms that have had jobs in the past or have jobs now. And because there's so few people with that, meaning you might have, 100,000 people that experience, they suddenly are getting jobs in all these weird areas. Like someone I'm just thinking of one guy who was in Denver, ended up in Texas and Dallas when he was in his late 60s, and firm couldn't have been happier. These kind of things happen when you start, especially the more specialized you are. Being specialized can make it difficult for you to get jobs in your market sometimes because there's just not a lot of demand for people like you. But in contrast, when you start looking at other markets, it can just open everything up. Like you're suddenly like this, there's a glove and it just fits perfectly on your hand, which is really cool. And so that happens. So I'll talk a little bit about just different types of attorneys in different markets. I will also talk about some practice areas that aren't on here, and I'll give you some idea about that. But I think the general thing to understand is that the more specialized your practice area is, the fewer people doing it, the more marketable you'll be, because law firms simply don't have the ability to find those people. So it was funny. Yesterday, I was recruiting recruiters to come work in our firm. And it's something I don't do a lot. I should do more of it but anyway, I was recruiting recruiters, and I texted this one recruiter who was also, most of the time when I recruit recruiters, I just look up people at a recruiting firm and then I type their name into the VCG database, and they've applied it sometime because we have a lot of applicants. And so then I start texting them instead of calling them or emailing them. And so I texted this one recruiter, and she had been working at, Axiom or some sort of other recruiting firm for 5 or 6 years. But before that, she'd been working for, 5 or 6 years as a family law attorney. So I texted her and she said, no, I'm not interested in jobs. I'm a recruiter. And when I called her, she said that the reason she said that is she'd been approached by 4 or 5 people, like trying to get her to go back and work as a family law attorney and recruiting her. So it's very funny that sometimes these practice areas are becoming very much in demand, and you wouldn't expect it, but even someone that has literally walked away from the profession and done something completely different is suddenly being recruited. It's very funny. And so if you're in the right practice area, sometimes when the market's right, it can make a difference. So this is about litigators. Litigators are almost always in demand. It might not be at the largest firms, but there's smaller firms that have work. There's people that will hire them. There's tons of litigators that are always available at all times. Now, it doesn't mean you can work as a litigator in the largest law firms, but it does mean that most litigators, if you look hard enough in whatever market you're in, you can find a job usually. Because there's typically in every city, there's litigators probably in every street. So it's it's not the most competitive practice area when you're moving within your own market. But if you want to relocate to different markets, it can be very difficult unless you're very specialized. I've noticed with litigators that it can be difficult in a lot of circumstances. When I talk about practice areas, it's important to understand how they work in different economies, because the economy goes through contractions and expansions. And right now it's in a contraction. There's been a lot of news stories lately about starting salaries decreasing. Some businesses that hired people at a starting salary of $50,000 are now hiring people at a starting salary of $30,000 because they're finding applicants. People that went to school for certain disciplines are no longer getting interviews. It just depends. But the nice thing about litigation, and it's interesting, so the corporate becomes impossible in bad economies. But what happens in bad economies is very interesting, is when the economy kind of cools, what starts happening is a lot of work starts coming into law firms because people are mad and they're looking for money from transactions that went poorly and all sorts of things. And so that is how that tends to work when there's a bad economy, is that the litigation, especially commercial litigation, will pick up, sometimes even personal injury litigation, then insurance defense, and all these things pick up. And litigators, what's nice about being a litigator is you can actually be often more marketable in a good economy than you would be in a bad economy than you'd be in a good economy. So I've literally seen firms, that you read a story, an announcement about how they're laying off 40 corporate attorneys and in one day, and then in the same day they're like that they're letting people go. They're interviewing and hiring litigators, which is funny. But relocating for a litigator can be a little bit difficult. And the best litigators, meaning a lot of times in litigation, it can be very competitive at the large law firms, especially the firms are looking for things that show that the person might have the skills of a litigator. They want them to be a writer. They want them to negotiate. They need to be advocates. And these are skills certainly that are natural and they can't test. So what they tend to look at, especially the large law firms, they're interested in things like having been on law review, then many times federal district court clerkships, but even more than federal district, they like circuit court clerkships at the best firms. The top law school is important, but then things that they don't even look at really that much for corporate attorneys, for whatever reason, for litigators, they're looking at class rank, order of the coif, like all this stuff that tends to matter more for litigators. And honestly, I think that's because I don't know, but this is how it works with litigators. Maybe it's because it's the only measure it's just more important. It matters when someone's 3 or 4 years out if they get interviews. So it's just important. And a lot of times, especially if you're relocating to a different market, they're measuring you on all this stuff that wouldn't really be as measured and concerned about in a transactional practice area. It's just, I'm not really sure why that is, but in the large law firms, it's more emphasized. Now, that's just I'm talking mainly about commercial litigation. And obviously, there's tons of different types of litigation where that doesn't matter. Real estate litigation, just tons of types of litigation. You can look at BCG and see all the different types of litigation. Appellate litigation would be one of these. But again, for major commercial litigation firms, it tends to be emphasized. And all these things are important, the law school, the big firms. And this is only if you want to work at the biggest firms. It's much more competitive. If you're working at a large law firm in Dallas, which is a great market, at a top firm there, and you want to relocate to Miami, I don't know, that they're going to have they're really going to be, the Miami firms are going to look very closely at the stuff. It's a large firm doing commercial litigation. The reason I bring up commercial litigation is because that's where most of the positions are for litigators. Then it's just more important for litigators and other types of attorneys. This is only for the largest law firms. For the smallest law firms and mid-level law firms and law firms that don't pay market rates, it's often could be not that difficult. And you go down these different prestige levels, which I'll talk a little bit about if anybody has questions during the Q&A. But the idea is for the prestige levels is the very most prestigious firms are going to be very difficult to relocate with, even as long as you have the best qualifications, and then the smaller firms less. And it's all about supply and demand. You have to be smart, by the way. And this is for if you're a law student. This is for if you're currently practicing, you're young. This is if you're trying to figure out what you can do to sell your experience to different types, or to develop business as an attorney. Anytime you go into something where there's a lot of competition and there's a lot of people doing what you're doing, It's harder to get business, it's harder to get jobs, it's harder to all those things. Like an example would be ERISA and executive compensation attorneys, completely marketable senior at the senior level, market at the junior level, able to get paid a lot of money, easier to get business. Like there's certain practice areas that if you go into, you're just very well suited because not a lot of people are doing them. And so you can get into major firms. I've seen people like when doing ERISA that are working at the top law firms, like top 20 prestige level law firms in the country that went to fourth tier law schools. And they get those jobs because they're able to develop huge books of business. There's not a lot of people that do them and that sort of thing. So just always remember, like from a business standpoint, what are you doing? What is the practice area you're going to and how much competition is there? Tax is another interesting one. I hate to keep bringing up these practice areas because I want everyone to get to the more points here, but this is very important. Like tax is another one where there's not a lot of positions in large law firms, meaning most tax attorneys in large law firms will support transactions. Not all of them, but a lot of them will. So there's a lot of tax attorneys in these giant accounting firms. So that's actually a very difficult practice area, even if you get an LLM and stuff, to move into a law firm. So all these things you need to really think through when you're looking for positions, when you're relocating. If you're relocating from Chicago to, I don't know, or it'd be a place far away, Seattle, and a law firm's hiring you, like they're going to have to pay your relocation costs. They're going to have to worry that you may leave. You may have to study for the bar exam if you can't waive in. So they're investing a lot of money in you. And especially if you're a litigator, like why in the world, where there's so many litigators, would they want to hire you and have to relocate you and all that stuff? So it's just not something they're interested in. And then with a corporate, and some of them are, and will do it, but most of them aren't. And then a lot of people are interested in hiring corporate and intellectual property attorneys because litigators, if you're a patent attorney, for example, and you're admitted to the USPTO, you can pretty much do most patent related work and don't need a license where the firm they want you to have one, but don't need a license. And the other thing just is litigators really need to be licensed in order to go to court. And that can take a while. So it's more difficult. And then the other thing is litigators relocate all the time. Then sometimes they're unable to move into the bar, or they may get admitted right away and they come close to clients. And there's just all sorts of problems. And many times litigators don't know the local rules. And so they can take more time getting up to speed. And there's more of a learning curve for litigators than there is for different types of corporate attorney or transactional attorneys. And so you just have to be aware of all this and your practice area and what you're doing. What's very funny is in Washington, D.C., because it's very easy to wave into, everyone tries to go there from all over the country, Chicago and New York and Seattle and Portland. Everyone's trying to go to D.C., and so it's very difficult. And most of the jobs in DC are litigation related. So it can become very difficult to get admitted. There's just a lot of stuff here that I don't want to take too much time on all this stuff regarding the bar. Just keep in mind that we will send, if it hasn't been sent already, I'll send it during question and answer, but we'll send you information about bar reciprocity, which is important to understand and when you're relocating, because obviously if it's easy for you to move, then it's much easier for the law firm to hire you. Again, corporate attorneys, very marketable during good economies. I've seen just crazy things happen with corporate attorneys, for example, relocating to various markets and doing very well there. You can often relocate from, if you're a corporate attorney, a corporate partner, you can relocate from different markets. What's interesting about corporate, I don't know how this is fun, but some of the first placements I ever made were corporate partners that were unemployed for one reason or another, and some that had been unemployed for 5 or more years. In some cases for just bizarre reasons. One of the guys that was unemployed he'd been a DC commissioner while a partner in a major law firm. I don't know how that worked. And then it turned out that he had a wife in both Los Angeles and one in Washington, DC, where he'd been a commissioner. And there were news stories about it. He lost his job and had all sorts of problems. And I was able to get him a job in a major firm in a big market in the Bay Area or something, because there was such a demand for people like that. I've had lots of examples. I could list probably 100 of corporate attorneys that are unemployed, that have had various issues and problems in their past, that when the market picked up, just suddenly were in demand. It's very funny. I'm talking about things that blow your mind, meaning, I don't know about that, but people being investigated for criminal, like all these sorts of things. There's so few corporate attorneys when the market picks up that law firms are really willing to look the other way because they just need people, and they figure maybe the person learned his lesson, and it's just very interesting. And there's always markets that are growing. When you hear about different markets in the United States, it could be Boise, Idaho, it could be whatever the market is that's exploding, Montana, I don't know, but there's always these markets that are exploding. I remember when there was this shale stuff going on, I don't know how long ago, but people were drilling for shale and converting it into oil, and all of a sudden I had all these attorneys getting interviews in North Dakota. Like, who would have thought? These people like being flown out to North Dakota from all over the country to get interviews as trust in the states attorneys, as corporate attorneys. So anytime you read about a market that's booming, like you might be reading the Wall Street Journal, you're reading some other paper, and they're like, oh, this market is really on fire, and there's all this housing and prices are going up. That also means that there's demand for attorneys. So this is very smart for you to apply there. I remember there's been a couple big boom cycles in Florida, like in Miami, where, they're throwing up all these condominiums and prices are going up and everything. And suddenly real estate attorneys from all over the country are very marketable there when they're not marketable in other markets. It's very interesting that if you watch markets and you watch the news and you see what's going on, a lot of times it'll be very easy for you to get a position in those markets when you might not have necessarily been able to in a normal market. So always read about markets that are busy. Corporate, again, you think about the centers of the country where a lot of deals are being done, which are always like New York and the Bay Area. And then smaller deals, of course, are being done in big cities and smaller markets all over the country. Let's see what this is about. Yes, a lot of times people will do very specialized work in corporate, and just a story here. And so being more specialized is actually very good. I have some examples. I remember there was a firm called Brown and Wood that was in the World Trade Center, and it's no longer around. I think it merged into, I think, Sidley and Austin. This is a couple decades ago or whatever. But I remember they used to be very specialized in this sort of weird corporate transactions that very few people did. And so someone could literally spend their career there doing this one type of corporate transaction and do nothing else. And so I remember I had this candidate that was let go from there as like a 12th or 14th year attorney, because the partners and the partner in the firm that did the transaction had moved on or died or something. And so this guy was out of work. And so when I got him, all I had to do was find like the 3 or 4 firms in New York that were still doing this. And all 3 of them with open arms welcomed him, and he got offers. And he, at that time, I think had been very discouraged because he thought his career was over. So a lot of times being very specialized can help you. Other times it can hurt you. I'm not saying it's always perfect, but if you have a skill that very few people have, that skill is not going to be outlawed or go away or something. You're in very, very good shape, unless there's some sort of thing that could be abolished with your different practice areas. So these are just, again, some stuff about corporate attorneys. I don't want to go too far into it. Corporate can be very funny. Sometimes it just booms in different markets. And the demand can be demand and not demand. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on patent prosecutors. I only bring up patent prosecutors just to let everyone know that it's a very interesting practice area. What makes patent prosecutors so unique is that you have to, in order to be a patent prosecutor, this is just something for other attorneys to understand. It's important just so when you navigate your career, you understand what they're doing. But they typically have to have scientific or mathematical or computer science backgrounds in order to be eligible to take the patent bar. And then once they take the patent bar, which is very difficult, then they're admitted to this federal patent bar or the U.S. Patent Office, so they can prosecute and argue patents and so forth for this organization. But what makes them unique is very few attorneys. Obviously, most people are majoring in English and political science and economics and things to go to law school. Very few attorneys major in these kind of scientific things. And because there's very difficult curves in these scientific and mathematical things, most of them don't have good grades, so they don't go to good law schools. It takes a long time for them to move up. but they're very in demand. They don't always get jobs, but if they look at enough firms, they're always going to get a position. There's certain things that are in demand, like electrical engineering, computer science, and physics. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the idea is being very specialized is just a very good thing. And again, there's a small percentage of attorneys that are eligible to take the patent bar. There's even a smaller percentage that take it. And there's even a smaller percentage that are stay doing and get the experience. And so there's just different practice areas you can do. There's over 300 practice areas on BCG. So you can see different types of practice areas. Some of the things that I've noticed are very funny are firms may have something like they'll have a practice area. Like there's practice areas, like there's a lemon law practice area. Lemon law is suing car makers or dealerships or something for when a car like keeps breaking down when you buy it. And we were making placements that there weren't a lot of firms around LA doing it. You know, with the starting salary of some of these people, meaning the move there was, you would think it'd be like, you know, very low, but it was actually like fifth-year attorney making $300,000 a year. Never could have imagined that. So, you know, anytime you're and there's not a lot of lemon law practice areas attorneys. So we'd search our database and, you know, get only a couple. And so there's just, you know, if you have skills that are highly in demand, which I recommend to every attorney, because if you have skills that are highly in demand, it'll mean that there's a lot of clients. If there's not a lot of attorneys doing the kind of work you are doing, then that's going to be helpful. And then if your skills are easily transferable, it becomes even easier to move markets. So what are some skills? Trust and estates attorneys. Great market. I've worked with trust and estates attorneys before that were looking in their local market and decided to look nationally and got 50 interviews. If you have certain types of practice areas, there's not a lot of people. Trust and estates, by the way, became a very active practice area when COVID happened, because a lot of people got very interested in that. It became just completely out of control. But if you're if you have skills that are in demand, where there's a lot of clients, there's not a lot of people doing what you do, and you can work at doing the same thing in different markets, it can be very useful. So just think about your practice area. Now, some practice areas can be very difficult and almost alienating and difficult. So some examples might be like where only big firms do that work, and big firms will let people go, like when they get senior, which I told you earlier, like international arbitration. There's others like project finance. There's just different types of practice areas. Capital markets is probably not so much, but there's just different practice areas where you're in very good shape, and you should govern your career, basically, I would think, based on your ability to have a niche product that is in demand. So very smart. If there's not a lot of people doing what you do, and there's not a lot of people that have the skills that you have, that are trained in what you do, you can move markets very easily because there's not a lot of people like you. So what are some examples? I'll just give you a few examples. I had made a placement not too long ago of a FDA attorney that had relocated from Washington, D.C. to San Diego for, I think her husband went in the military or something. I don't know what exactly the circumstances were, but again, she wanted a job in San Diego. There were two firms in San Diego that did FDA related work. Both of them basically engaged in a bidding war because there's no attorneys in San Diego that do FDA work. They didn't even have openings. They just wanted someone like that. Again, the more specialized you are, a lot of times the better. I certainly recommend that everyone do what they can to be specialized, because again, that will help you attract clients. It will help. Law firms can't find a lot of people like you. It will give you the ability to relocate to different markets, just all sorts of things. So you need to be strategic with your career and how you think about the type of work you're doing or how you market yourself as an attorney. And this is just another piece of advice. And I hate giving so much advice here, but I just want to make sure that I'm making you be as marketable as you possibly can. Another piece of advice that I think is very important is if you are any type of attorney, people will always love to put all sorts of different experience on their resume. They'll say, oh, I did commercial litigation. Then I also prosecuted a trademark. And only that, I helped out with a real estate transaction and did some work on. So if you put all these different things in your resume, it hurts you, because law firms and clients, by the way, want specialists. And I keep talking about this, but I just keep seeing resumes of people that aren't specialists. Every law firm wants to hire someone that's specialized in something. Now, in smaller markets, maybe not. They want, because there's not enough specialist work. But most law firms want specialists. In addition to law firms wanting specialists, clients want specialists. If you were accused of murder, you wouldn't want to go see an attorney that did corporate law and a little bit of criminal law. That wouldn't make you feel safe and secure. You would want to hire an attorney that was specialized in your practice area. You'd want to hire a criminal law attorney. You want to hire the best one you could get. So that's just how it works. So these are markets for relocating. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them. Major markets can be good to relocate to if there are not a lot of people in your practice area that are local. And many times smaller markets, like a small town in Virginia, is going to be difficult many times unless you're from that area. And I think the best markets for relocation are typically California, if you have the bar, then the East Coast. Chicago, I would say at this point, probably that market has not been as active as it normally used to be. So I would say that in addition, that you might be a little better off things like Texas and Florida if you have the bar. And just keeping in mind some of these markets. California is huge. It's 1/6 of the world's economy. There's always a lot of demand for attorneys in California, and that the health of the market can go up and down. But what's interesting is a market like California, there's markets that are busy like California all around. But if you compare a market like California to Pittsburgh or Detroit and things like that, those some markets are either growing or a lot of times they're shrinking. So a market like Detroit, where I had issues getting a position, used to be a very big market with a lot of opportunity. And the auto industry used to be the equivalent of what the technology industry is now, is where all the opportunity was. And so it was a very vibrant legal market. But then obviously with the decline of manufacturing, automation of manufacturing and so forth, and then that market started going downhill. And markets where a lot of technological innovation stuff was happening, which would be California and so forth, started taking off. And New York has traditionally been the center of finance. So that's all. So there's just a lot of things going on in different legal markets. But when you think about legal markets where you want to work, you definitely want to think about markets that are expanding rather than contracting. Because if a market's contracting, everyone's going to be fighting for work. It's like a race to the bottom. Why would you want to participate in that? Unless you had some sort of practice area that would help you, like bankruptcy or in a race to the bottom market. So think about the markets you want to work in and stay in, because those markets will determine your success or failure as in the market. California, very much in demand. Palo Alto, always extremely active, especially for corporate and technology. And again, the markets that are expanding are great. Again, the Bay Area, just all these law firms on Sand Hill Road and stuff, everybody wanted to be there because there was opportunities. You should go and you should try to participate in markets where there's opportunities. And I can't really stress that enough. Going to markets where there's a demand for people like you is very good. And markets where a lot of the people that are hired aren't from that market is also very smart. Trying to find markets where there's a lot of activity versus the opposite is really a good thing. And I'm not going to talk too much about these markets, but when you move to some of the markets, you do need to keep, and depending on how much money you make, you should think about things like taxes. So the taxes in California, there's 8.5% income tax. There's no taxes in Florida or Texas. There's lots of taxes in New York City. You need to think about that. You need to think about the cost of living, whether or not you can buy a house, like the commutes, all these sorts of things are important to think about, and when you're moving to markets. And so these are a lot of the stuff I've gone through. I don't want to waste too much of everyone's time before the Q&A, but this is just about California and the kind of the demand there for attorneys, and talking about New York and then just these different markets. The big markets, just so you understand, get very bad during market slowdowns. The reason for that is because there are so many people in those markets competing for the same jobs. So just imagine if there's 8,000 jobs. This is a high number. Let's say 2,000 jobs for corporate attorneys in New York, but there's 8,000 people looking for work. That's obviously not a good situation for you because you're competing with, for every job, you're competing with 4 people. And that's what happens when those markets slow down. But certain markets you can be transient, meaning you just come there from anywhere and no one cares. That's a good New York and Greater now Miami, Texas, California are relocation type markets. And you should think about that in terms of transients, the ability to work in different markets. I like smaller markets because this is not a great economy at the moment. I do feel like everyone that's looking for a position that should be looking in smaller markets. And what I mean is markets outside of major cities. It could be suburbs. It could be markets like outside of major cities. So an example would be if you are working in Detroit, you could relocate to Grand Rapids, which is a smaller market. If you're working in New York City, you could relocate to upstate New York, which are often very good markets, very receptive markets actually to people from New York. If you're working in, if you're working in Chicago, you could relocate to the suburbs of Chicago. There's just all sorts of things that are very smart moves and that you can make to smaller markets. And it's obviously easier if you're in certain practice areas, but a lot of small markets, I wouldn't call Seattle a small market at this point, but a lot of markets growing. Phoenix is a market that took off. It just keeps growing. It's just crazy. So that can be a very good market for people. And in just thinking about markets that are growing. This is a little bit, there are a lot of slides here and a lot of stuff I could talk about still. But I do want to go to the Q&A. I just want to make a few observations here. Relocating is really one of the smartest things you can do to really improve your career. It's one of the most important aspects of your search. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that a lot of careers come up against dead ends. They come up against dead ends in the markets they're in. So you may be in a big market and not be able to realize that it's going to be very difficult to get a job. That's terrifying, by the way. Imagine you have apartments or houses or cars or whatever, student loans, and you're suddenly in a position where you're having a really hard time getting a job, or if the jobs you're getting aren't going to be enough to pay your expenses and support you. That's pretty terrifying and not something that makes you happy or makes your family happy, and it is pretty freaking bad. Also, you may be in a market where there's no opportunities, where there's just nothing going on, and that's a contracting market, or where there's too many attorneys competing for the jobs that you're competing for, and so you can't get a position, or there's no opportunities for senior attorneys because there's so many junior and mid-level attorneys. There's just all sorts of reasons that you may want to work and relocate. And I can't tell you how many attorneys, like when I say how many attorneys, I'm talking about thousands and thousands of attorneys whose careers had hit like complete dead ends in different markets. One of the first placements I made was fun, was a woman that was in Atlanta that was fired from her firm. And not only that, but for whatever reason, the firm just was very negative about her. And if anybody called, they didn't like her. And she was having a very hard time and lost. And I remember one time when she flew to LA for an interview, I went and met her in the airport and started crying. And so this is how it works. People, when this stuff happens, get very upset. To make a long story short, I ended up getting her a job with a very good IP firm and she wasn't an IP attorney. Her background was in corporate, a very good IP firm in the Bay Area. And she worked there for several years. And then I think the firm merged with some other firm, and the firm was called Penny and Edmonds. And they basically, all these IP firms were having a very hard time staying in business. So the firm merged with another firm. And then at some point she lost her job, but she'd gotten these skills doing a very specific type of transaction. And I'm not going to tell you the transaction because I don't want to give away her identity, but she opened up this law firm doing it. And she opened it up, and these clients from all over the world were just finding her website. And so she started out charging $250 an hour. And then she was getting more than enough work to bill a couple thousand hours a year. So she just kept raising her rates. Then it was like 500, and then it was 600, and then it was 700. And so now she's bringing in, with a small law firm, like over $1 million a year with no overhead. And it's just incredible. So just all because she was open to relocating. And story after story like this, I can tell tell you. So this is what you need to do to keep your career on track. This is what you need to do to save your career and to really get the respect and everything that you deserve. If you try to stay in the market you're in many times, if there's not opportunities and you're not getting any bites, it could be for a lot of reasons. It could be because there's too many people like you. It could be because, I don't know, because there's the economy's bad there. It could be because there's not enough clients for your practice here. Who knows? It doesn't really matter. What matters is like you're trying to sell stuff in the wrong market. So obviously you don't want to sell snow cones to Eskimos. You'll sell them something that they want. And so you can't try to sell a product where there's no interest. You can't open a Rolls-Royce dealership in a city in the middle of nowhere. Come on. So you have to take your business where people want it. And so you just have to, these are just some stupid things here about different things. I guess your professional profile would be, and these aren't stupid, but it would be your practice area, your experience, how many attorneys are in the market like you, and whether the market's expanding or contracting. It could be on the number of attorneys. Is the market saturated with those type of attorneys? Is there opportunity for those type of attorneys? I talk about this a lot, but it's important to understand this. For example, in New York City and pretty much Los Angeles and most big markets, these law firms, especially the large ones, can say, hey, we'll hire first-year attorneys and we'll work them really hard. And if they do a good job, we'll keep them around as mid-level attorneys. But unless they have business or they do something along those lines, we're really not that interested in them after 8 or 9 years, and we would appreciate it if they look for another job, or would just basically tell them to ask for another job. And it's not because there's anything wrong with the attorney necessarily. It's just because they want to hire people younger and hungrier, and that they can bill out at lower rates to the clients. These are just things that law firms are interested in and can do in large markets because there's so many people that want to work there. Or they can always replace you with someone better if they want. If they don't think you're doing a good enough job or working hard enough, they can just bring someone else in. So, so there's just market dynamics going on everywhere. And in markets where there's a lot of attorneys, they can afford to let people go. They can afford to lay a lot of people off because they know they can always find people. So this just happens. And so you have to understand that with the market you're relocating to. A lot of times you can relocate to a market and there's literally no one like you there. Or I tell the story a lot. I probably tell it every third webinar, but I'll tell it again. So when I clerked for a judge, I was clerking in a city called Bay City, which is outside Detroit, but over an hour outside Detroit. But it's part of the Detroit court. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But anyway, when I was clerking there were all these young attorneys that, not young, there were like 5 or 6 that would come into court, and they were close to my age, and they were 1 or 2 or 3 years out of law school, and they would come into court all the time. So I got to know them outside of work. But the point is that after 20 plus years after clerking for this judge, all those people were at the same law firm that they had been at when I knew them, which was when they were 1 to 3 attorneys. Meaning some markets, like there's just not a lot of people, so they keep people around, and they don't have a lot. No one really wants to work in Bay City. It's an old lumber town that has been going downhill since the 1900s. Again, this is a dead market where there's not a lot of people. These people were in a city called Midland, where for whatever reason has a little bit going on because Dow Chemical's there, but then you have cities like Flint around there, which you've probably seen on the news. But anyway, there's just all sorts of markets. There's dynamics and things that will help you, and where you'll find receptiveness where you might not normally find receptiveness. I got all these stories to tell, and I think that they're useful just because they show you how things work. I had this woman in San Francisco who's had something horrible happen to her. I think it was like her boyfriend committed suicide in front of her or something. It's just something just so outrageous that you would be scarred irrevocably from it. And so this happened. And so she basically had a mental breakdown, which anybody would, and then ended up losing her job somewhere in the Bay Area. And she was a corporate attorney. And after 6 months of just being completely devastated, and oh, by the way, she'd been at the firm that she was at less than a year, like 9 months or something, decided to look for a job. Didn't contact me first. She contacted some local recruiter that she knew in the Bay Area and didn't get a single interview. No, nothing happened, because why would someone hire someone that had 9 months of experience and basically had some serious problems and then hadn't worked for 6 months? So I was just like, listen, man, there's too many attorneys in the Bay Area because there's thousands of junior corporate attorneys that don't have these issues that you have. But you have a good background. You did well in law school. You got a job with a big firm. So let's look at other places. So I sent her to firms in Ohio and Memphis and Arkansas, like just all these different places. And she got so many interviews. When I say interviews, I'm like 20 plus interviews, that she completely was overwhelmed. And she went on some of them, and then she would get a job offer, and then she would just ghost the firm. But anyway, the point is, and she eventually took one of the jobs. But honestly, I don't think she wanted to work again. I don't know, but she eventually took one of the jobs. So my point to you is that all these great things, if you look at other markets, you think your career is dead, you can get lots of jobs if you're interested in it. Another quick example, I had this I was working with. She was in a big market and she was trying to find a job. And I think she was born in Germany. Her mother was from the US, her father was German or something. She was born in Germany and lived there until middle school, and then moved to the United States, and then went to college and law school, and then got a job with a big firm and in a market. And then all of a sudden there was like this huge market slowdown. There were no jobs for corporate attorneys, and she didn't know what she was going to do, and she was losing her job. And I was like, hey, why don't you apply to firms in Germany? So she does that. And of course, within literally over Zoom, ends up getting a position with a huge English law firm in Germany, and also got some other interviews. So this is how it works. If you look at and so she went over to Germany, was practicing in Germany, how much fun is that? Now, I don't think she needed to be admitted to the bar or anything. I don't really know exactly how that worked, but she got a position in a big law firm in Germany. So when you start thinking about these different markets you can work in, it can change the course of your life and your career. And it's just it just changes everything. And again, people that get laid off, partners that have skills, but can't be marketable, don't think they're marketable. All these people that just they think nothing's happening to their career, and they blame themselves, but it's really just the market. If you're trying to sell something in a market where there's too many competitors, what are you supposed to do? Why would you, again, like if you're on a road and there's 100 different clothing stores and you try to open a clothing store, you're going to have a really hard time because there's just too many competitors. If you're on a street and there's 100 different gas stations, but you need to send your stuff and what you're selling to places that are willing to buy it. And all you have to do is identify different markets to move to. It's really not that hard. There are some rules about relocating, which I think I covered some of them, but some of the rules would be things like you want to try to have a connection there. The more connection you have, the better. You have to have skills that are marketable in that region where they can't find people, where you have to have a good case for being there and relocating. You have to be able to position yourself as not relocating out of desperation. There's just a lot of things you can do, and you can read about it on our site and different ways of doing it. But I know of no more effective kind of career strategy for someone who's having a hard time in their market than relocating. Again, you can relocate within a state. I see things all the time. I see just these crazy things. And I talk about this, again, this is another thing I talk about, but I used to answer, when this is a young company, I used to answer the phones when law firms were calling and stuff. And we still get these calls because I see the emails going around. Just in California, there's all these small towns and things that are like an hour from another place. And because it's a huge state. And the same thing in Nevada, the same thing in Arizona. There's just these places in these markets where there's just not a lot of people, but there's always like an attorney in one of these towns, or there's two attorneys in the town, and they both go to they're small and they go to the court an hour away or whatever. But there's always like these markets where there's just a few attorneys. And then, so what happens is every year, some of these attorneys will call and they'll say, hey, I'm retiring and I need someone to take over my practice. And I'll say, how big is your firm? And they'll say, I bring in $600,000 a year and I have a secretary. And so I have these expenses. So I'm usually clearing about 400. I'm like, wow, this is, can you find someone to take over my practice and work there? And I'm like, sure, I can try, but then no one ever wants to do it. I don't know why, because why would you not want to take over a business and make $400,000 a year? But these kind of things, they're all over. It's tons of them. I got a call. This is a funny story, but I'll tell. I got a call from this attorney in Costa Mesa, California, which is in Orange County, and it's a nice area of California. And he was in the same building, I think, as Morrison and Forrester and Oric, and a very nice building. He had very nice offices in the building. And so I started talking to him, and he had this law firm that was doing trust and estates work that was bringing in, I don't know, like $1.8 million a year or something. And he was making like 1.2 or 1.3. And not only that, he was like 80 years old and barely functioning. But he was there, but he would talk and he would drool a little, but he was still doing the work. And I couldn't believe it. And I was like, wow, that's a great business. And so I told him I can help find these other firms that you can merge it into and we'll pay you something. And then I started talking to him, and he was Mormon and a very nice guy and had all these values and pictures of all his kids and this big family. And so I went and met with him a couple of times, and he was like, I want you to take my firm and you to run it. And I was like, what? And so he kept trying to get me to run his firm. And this is, again, I'm running this legal placement firm, and I don't know why I was spending so much time with him, and so I was like, wow, maybe I can take this over and run it for him virtually and everything. But eventually I was just like, you know what, this is not something I want to do. And the two of us kind of parted ways. But the point is, there's people like this all over that you can find when you send out resumes. You send out a resume to someone in a small town, and who knows, you could take over a business you don't know. But my point to you is that there's so much opportunity when you start relocating and looking at places. I had a business that I could have, if I didn't want to do what I'm doing now, where I could have made over $1 million a year walking into calls every year. Sometimes they're not big law firms. A person might say, oh, I bring in 200,000 and I pay my secretary. And after that, but there are these things all over. So I'm just trying to make everyone aware of how much opportunity there is when you start thinking about other markets and you get out of the shell, like I need to work in this one place and that's the only place I want to work. And that's just not healthy. If you start looking at a lot of different markets in your search all over California, there's hundreds of markets. Everything changes. I could tell these stories all day, but I like telling them because I believe that they can show you the opportunity out there. So I had another candidate. She was in the Bay Area working at a huge intellectual property firm, was a patent attorney, and had gone to, University of Michigan for law school. Very smart person, and just a lot of very good characteristics that made her very remarkable. So she had all this kind of stuff, but she decided she wanted to be an environmental attorney, which is it's litigation. It's completely removed from being a patent attorney. And if she tried to do that in San Francisco, it would be next to impossible. Not only would it be next to impossible, it would be impossible, because if every environmental job is going to get 50 applications of people wanted to work there. So why would it, not that many, but every environmental job is going to get a lot of applications. Why in the world would somebody hire a patent prosecutor to environmental? So she ended up getting a job in something like Sacramento, which is a smaller market. She went and got a job at a smaller firm, and she stayed there for several years. And then she got a job in a big firm doing that again. All this would have been impossible had she not been open to relocating. So all these people that are getting jobs and their careers are changing and they're switching practice areas, they're walking into opportunity that never would have existed, are doing that by being very smart with their careers and walking into different markets instead of competing with all sorts of people. Think about companies. Companies are always opening up, law firms, they're always opening offices in new markets where there's opportunities. Companies are opening things where there's opportunities. Fast food restaurants are moving to different markets that are growing where there's opportunities. So everyone's chasing opportunity. And in order to chase opportunities, you need to find new markets for what you sell. Think about McDonald's. Like, they have a whole team looking for people to find markets that are growing and where there's opportunity. And it's just the whole thing. And hotel chains, everyone's doing that. So you need to do the same thing with your legal career. Don't get stuck in this halo where all you're thinking about is your market. If you look at other markets, your whole life can change. Just think about me. I'm sitting there and somebody offers me a business, like a law firm business that he's built up over 50 plus years that makes over $1 million a year, and just basically says, here, I want you to take it. This stuff is true. It just, this kind of stuff happens when you start looking at other markets, and you can find people like that. This guy too, it was very funny. He was looking for an associate or someone because he needed help. And he started showing me these resumes and that he wanted to hire, and he had no idea what he was doing. And anyway, the point is that you need to look at other markets. If you look at other markets, it will help you. And I can't stress it enough. It's changed so many people's lives. And again, I don't want to harp on this, keep harping on it, but it can be miraculous. And if you start looking at other markets, you're going to change the course of your career if you're stuck in the market you're in. All right, so I'll take a quick break and then I'll come back. I see that people are already asking questions, which is good. And I'll answer all the questions you have. The other thing is the questions, this is the first one of the webinar you've been on, they don't need to be anything about this webinar. They can be about personal things you're dealing with, your career, or questions that you have. And it's really good to ask questions, because sometimes the answers to those questions or the different insight you get in those questions can also help you in terms of advancing in what you're trying to do with your career. So I'll be back in just 1 second, and then maybe like a minute and a half. And then when I come back, I'll take questions. And again, just one other thing for when you're asking questions. It looks, if you're logged into Zoom, it'll show your name, but I won't. I'll just cut and paste the question. All the questions are anonymous. I think people are always a little nervous about asking questions, people knowing their identity and stuff. So this is just help. Everything is confidential. So. Okay, many times when you relocate as an attorney, you can certainly, it doesn't really, I don't know that there's ethical considerations around leaving existing clients in your previous location. I'm not aware of any, but generally what people will do is they will continue to service their clients unless they're moving to another state. So if you want to ask a follow-up question, I mean, I understand that as well. But I don't think clients have a free market. I think that clients can go anywhere that they want with that. Okay, let's see. Well, this is an interesting question, because I think a couple of people have asked foreign questions. Okay, I'm a corporate attorney from Hong Kong with 10 years of experience. I recently moved to the US and is an attorney in Washington State. What do you think about the legal market for attorney in Washington State? I'm willing to move to other states as well. Which other states do you think I look into? Okay, so that's a good question. So one of the things this applies to people all over that are relocating to different markets. So you're from Hong Kong and you have 10 years of experience, and now you want to work in Washington State. So this is a thing I'll show everyone. This is something that I teach to candidates. I teach it to law firms, and it's a very kind of important way of understanding your particular marketability in different markets. So the first thing is, every attorney, it doesn't matter who you are or what your background is, every attorney is marketable. You're marketable somewhere, and you're pretty much always marketable even in your own market. It's just a question of the types of firms you're willing to look at and how much you're willing to make and how far down the line you're willing to go. So at the top of the market, you have your largest, most prestigious firms. These firms are very difficult for people to get into. It's probably 1/10 of 1%, or I don't know what the number would be, but it's very low. Very few attorneys. Maybe there might be 200 to 300 positions a year, if that, maybe even less than 300 positions probably a year at these firms for entry-level people. So these are not something you should worry about. These are your crevasse, these just places that are just very difficult to get positions in. So that's your standard firm. Then your next one are going to be like your AmLaw 100, 200, and super prestigious, very prestigious boutiques, and those sorts of firms. Those firms, let me just say boutiques. So those sorts of firms are much more accessible. These are probably the kind of firms you're thinking of. So in Seattle, there might be 20 of these types of firms. I don't know what the number would be, but this is where most people aspire to. So these are the firms that they pay market rate, they're prestigious, they have big clients, that sort of thing. So this is where most people are trying to work. Frankly, because they receive so many applicants, if you're from a foreign country, even if you're admitted to the bar, they're always going to prefer, as you would too if you were them, they're going to prefer hiring local attorneys. And not only that, but they have all these rules where it's much harder to get a job with them. If you're more senior, the marketability of an attorney is typically 1 to 2, somewhat marketable. Let me see. This is just for laterals at big firms. Somewhat, then 3 to 6, 3 to 5, 5 to 6. I'm just trying to give you guys a very marketable. And then 3, and then when you get maybe 7, 10, not 2, and then 10 plus. Very difficult. So this is just the rules. This is a level of experience. This is just how things are. Is it age discrimination? It's not age discrimination. It's just experience discrimination. And I'm very confident with that. And so this is just something to keep in mind. So as a 10th year corporate attorney, it's going to be very difficult for you to get a position. It's also going to be the law supply and demand is they're going to prefer U.S. attorneys that may not have visa issues and all that sort of thing, and that may be from Seattle or whatever, and they're not worried about leaving. So these are the firms that everyone's trying to get jobs at. They feel badly when they don't. They think they're like second-class citizens especially if they went to a big law school or whatever. But this is not where most of the jobs are. Your 3 firms are like your mid-sized firms, that mid-size to good boutiques, good small firms, and this is probably where most of your opportunity is going to be. What's important to understand about your 5 firms, this is just a thing that I developed, but these are going to be mostly the largest clients, with the largest clients, et cetera. And then these are also going to be clients with a lot of money. And then these are going to be these mid-sized good boutiques. These are going to be smaller firms, smaller clients. And all of these are going to be working for companies. All these attorneys are going to be working for companies. And the reason I'm just telling you that is companies have more money. And that means more money and most money. And so they can afford to pay you a lot of money. So then when you get down to 2, this is companies and individuals, mainly individuals, some companies. So what I'm saying here, and this is a lot of information to talk about, but the reason I'm talking about this is what most people do in your situation is they try to go and think, oh, I need to work at one of these big firms I've heard of. This is where I'm going to apply. And they expect to get some results. And the odds of that are not impossible, but they're pretty freaking slim. So the only way that you're going to get a position in Seattle is if you're going to start trying to talk to mid-sized good boutique firms with smaller clients or smaller to mid-sized clients. And this is the only way that's going to happen. And then for your 2 firms, that's going to be probably also where you're going to wind up. So this is meaning you're working for smaller businesses. Now, the reason you have to do that, and the reason anybody's going to have to do that, is because if you have all the stuff going against you, meaning you're from another country, you have a lot of experience, you may have all this stuff, you just have to go down and look at smaller companies or smaller firms to get a position. You don't really have any other option, because the big firms, you may get hired if you have some specific type of experience that's really rare and that they can't find, and maybe clients in China or Hong Kong. But other than that, the firms have no incentive to hire you. But you start looking at the smaller firms that may not see people like you with your type of experience, or may have work and they're not willing to pay as much as the bigger firms, then you can get a position. So that's how I would recommend approaching things. And if you do that, you'll get a job. But if you just keep all of your attention on these firms you've heard of and that sort of thing, or firms that get a lot of applicants locally, you're just not going to have a lot of luck. And that goes for everyone on the call. You have to start out sometimes at smaller firms to get a job, and then you can move up to bigger firms as you get experience, especially in corporate. So what's nice about corporate is you could literally start at a 2 firm, and if the economy takes off, you could get a job at a 4 firm. So there's just all these things going on in the background, but your main objective should be this is all consumers without a lot of money to spend. Okay. That's that. Let me just see. Okay. This is that. Give me 1 second. Question. So I'm just closing that. Okay. So this question is, let's see. Consider I'm currently a junior associate with only 2 years of experience. Would this be an opportune time to relocate, or should I accrue more experience with my current employer to move? Okay, so that's a good question. Typically, it is important if you have specific reasons for needing to relocate right now, meaning you're losing your job, the firm doesn't have any work, something along those lines, then by all means start relocating. But I think that regardless of your experience level, I would recommend, this is for anyone on the call. Again, in the business of recruiting and placing people, but I'll just tell you that from your what you're doing, you're really, unless your firm is not that prestigious and you get into a much prestigious firm, or you don't have a lot of work, or the work's not very good, you're always going to be much better off trying to relocate after you get more experience. So, if you can stay there for 5 years, if you can stay there for 6 or 7 years, there's just a different type of reception of the people get in the legal market when they manage to stay with one employer for a long period of time, because it shows that you can get along where you go. It shows that you're loyal. It shows that you're willing to commit to an employer. It shows that if they hire you, you're more likely to stick around, and they're not going to have any breaks or anything in terms of servicing their clients. It shows a lot of really good things. And those things that it shows are very positive for your career, and it can help you in the long run. So, unless there's a way for you to move to a much more prestigious firm in your own market or another market, there's really no point in doing it. I recommend to everyone that if your firm is okay and there's nothing wrong with it, and then you stay where you are as long as you can, because it just makes you that more attractive later on, and it sends a lot of really good messages to the market. And once you've been there for 6 or 7 years at a firm, they're like, wow, this person's committed, they're sticking around, maybe I should, all those sorts of things. So that's good. The only thing I would say is if you can move to a much more prestigious firm in another market, or you want to switch practice areas or something, then yeah, you should try to move now. But you need to have very good reasons for that. You don't just relocate markets because you think it could be a better opportunity. You should try to move only when when you can get ahead. And a lot of the moves that I've talked about so far on this call have been people that have been forced to move, meaning they just ran out of opportunities in their market, or there was no opportunity in their market. The market was going downhill. Okay, I'm currently a junior associate with only 2 years of experience. With this being, this is the same question I just answered. I'm sorry, no, I've got to cover this one. Sorry about that. I built my reputation in my current city for handling high-profile cases. Would this reputation transfer effectively if I moved to a bigger pond with bigger fish, or would I be starting? Yeah, so if you're doing large cases in your city, there's no reason for you to relocate. I don't know why you would even want to do that, unless you think you can do the types of cases that you do in a larger market and will do much better. So if I was in your situation, I don't know why I would even think about moving, because you're getting clients, people are contacting you, you're known, people are bringing you up when other people ask for people to do your kind of work. So there's all sorts of reasons that I would recommend not moving. I don't see why it makes sense. The only way that I would recommend doing that would be if you have some sort of reason to. So this is actually a very good question. And I think that for all the things that I've said about the advantages of relocating, in a lot of cases, there's no advantage. There's no reason to. If you're doing really well in your market and you're getting clients, and why would you relocate? It doesn't make any sense. The only way it would make sense is if you feel like you could do much better in another market, but then you have a whole other task of getting a reputation and all sorts of things. I was talking to someone the other day that was interesting, and it relates to this. My significant other she's from a town called Mammoth in California, which is like a ski town, but she's also French. So she was working in Mammoth doing real estate work, like selling real estate, and was very successful and got along with people. And it was like a a real cooperative environment. She was selling things and making a lot of money and everything was good. And then she decided she wanted to move to France and do stuff there. So she knew someone that was very high profile, was able to get her a position that was with her family with this place called Sotheby's, and which was a top real estate place for doing what she did. And as she started doing deals there, she just got eaten alive. Like people in her office just would take her clients and compete with her and try to undermine her and all these awful things. And so she was shell-shocked and then felt horribly, and then started working for a much smaller real estate firm doing things. So reason why am I bringing that up? I'm bringing that up because when you move into larger markets, you're suddenly dealing a lot of times with a much more competitive market that's dog eat dog and can be very scary, and where things are done differently, and where people are so competitive they eat other people alive. And that goes from practicing law. I don't know why there's any advantage to doing that unless you feel so freaking competitive and you feel like you can handle anything. That's a good thing for you. But I don't know that that's the smartest thing to do for a lot of people. So I would tell you to be careful, because just trying to get into a bigger market is not always helpful. No, it's this next question. Okay, how do my years of experience factor in the equation? For example, as a mid-level associate, would it be easier or harder for me to adapt to a new market compared to a fresh associate as a new partner? No. So the best time, I did bring that up here, which I'm glad. So the best time to move for anyone is really here. So your best time, the very best time to move is between your third and your fifth or sixth years. The reason for that is it's pretty too marketable. Let me turn this down. This would be very marketable. Okay, the reason for that it's very easy to move between your third and fifth and 6 years is your billing rates are not too high. They're not too high, meaning you're not competing with partners. Partners mean when you get more senior, your billing rate has to rise. So no competition. Partners for what I mean by that, when you're like a 10th year, if partners are giving you work, your billing rates are close to the partners, the clients would rather have the partners do it. Partners make more money when they do their own work as opposed to give it to others. That's really the gist of it. So you're very marketable. You know what you're doing. So you can do most things on your own, meaning you don't have, it's like a junior associate is not proven, but you're proven commodity. And then the other big one is law firms don't have to worry about making you partner or anything. They can get several years worth of work out of you about you making partner. And not only that, but you're obviously committed to working in a law firm. And so you're going to work really hard because you're not too far from being a partner. It's not too far from being a partner. All right, so these are some of the things that are really crucial to understand. And so this is why people at this level, third to fifth or sixth year, are very marketable. There's no other time in your career when you're going to be more marketable, other than when you're maybe a first-year associate with great grades coming out of law school or whatever, and if you're a partner with business. So this is really the best time to move, and especially to larger firms and that sort of thing. Many people start out at firms that would be considered like a 3 or even a 2, and they're able to move to 4 firms that they never would have been able to have a hope in hell of getting in when they're in law school. So that can help you quite a bit. Okay, so this is a question about litigators. So litigators are interesting. I don't know about local case law and precedent, but litigators are, people know a good litigator from a bad litigator. They have people that are litigators are very hungry. They want to do a good job. There's all these kind of things that go along with being a litigator. And if you are a litigator, your transferable skills are really going to be whatever the kind of work you do. So you may specialize in suing railroad companies. You may specialize in defending malpractice claims against doctors. Whatever, the more specialized you are, typically the easier it is to move. We have this. I'd love to share it with you, but I don't know if I pull up the right spreadsheet on this call because I have 10 spreadsheets. in my thing up here. But the most marketable practice areas right now are actually in litigation, but they're not like commercial litigation. They're things like medical malpractice defense or things that you wouldn't even think of. The most easy way to communicate transferable skills is to have some sort of specialty within litigation. If you're a commercial litigator, then that's what it is, but you may have a special skill there. So litigators, the ones that are going to be the most marketable are attorneys that are able to have that specialize in something. And if you specialize in something, then law firms are going to be much, much more interested in you than if you have other types of things going on. Let's see here. And again, if anybody has more questions, not a ton more questions to answer, then I will answer all the questions. Okay, so this is a question about someone that has clients or client relationships and may want to move. So that's a good question. What, in terms of retaining your clients when you're moving, you either have a good relationship with them that they want to move with you or you don't. What a lot of senior associates will do, or people that have been in the same firm for over a decade, is it will be like the go-to person for that client. The partners often will not take as much interest in the client or the candidate anymore, or the clients anymore. The people that will be interested in the clients will be the senior associate. And so many times those people will relocate with you if they're not your clients. If they are your clients, then when you do move firms, they're going to be concerned about your billing rate. They're going to be concerned about the ability of the new firm to service them and that sort of thing. If your question, you can ask a follow-up question, is about talking about your clients in the new firm. When you're talking about clients for a new firm, if you're bringing them over, then the law firms are going to want to know how much business it is, like from the clients, how long the clients have been working, how long they've been working with you, and that sort of thing. So if you've been working with a client for 3 years and they bill $100,000 a year, then that's part of the business. And then if you have 10 clients like that, you have $1 million. That's a lot of times how the law firms will think about clients. This is an interesting question. This person says, I primarily worked in nonprofit legal roles. Could this be an asset or a hindrance? Yeah, nonprofit is awesome because I don't know if you're working in a nonprofit or you're working in a law firm doing nonprofit, but nonprofit it's a huge business. I don't know what the number is, but I think it's like over $1 trillion or something in the market is with nonprofits. I could be wrong, but I think it's something like that. So if you're working in nonprofit, that's actually a really good thing. There's plenty of nonprofits you could work at as an attorney, or if you're working in a law firm, there's plenty of that as well. Nonprofits are in every state and every country, and there's tens of thousands of them in most states. And so it's a huge portion of the economy. It's a weird portion of the economy because people will start these nonprofits and then get donations and keep the money, but whatever. They're not closely governed, but yeah, you can do very well working in nonprofits. And something I've actually been looking at quite a bit recently because there's not for placing attorneys, but just reading about nonprofits is very interesting. Okay, for those, especially in state-specific areas like real estate or probate, how does BCG facilitate a smooth move? Okay, so yeah, real estate and probate are both, there are certainly some local rules and things associated with them, but those are two practice areas where real estate's not doing that great at the moment, but those are two practice areas where people can do very well moving to new firms, and you can transition from small markets to big markets, from big markets to small markets. There's a lot of demand for those types of attorneys in different markets. I relocated people to Los Angeles from weird markets like Maryland or Boise, Idaho was one of the ones I can remember. There's lots of ways to relocate to different markets. And it's not really that, I guess my point is it's not really that difficult in those two practice areas that are transactional. You can typically get a lot of opportunities doing that. Let's see here. Okay, so here's a question. I'll put the person's name up. So I'll just question someone from Greece wants to relocate to position as attorney. Yeah, this is from Greece. I'm just saying from Greece. So you just have to, the problem is with all these relocations is there has to be some sort of incentive for the law firms to hire you. You have to have something. So then this is a good question. It could be from Greece, it could be from Alaska, wherever. I'm just saying areas far out of nowhere. But the point is that if you're relocating to a market, you have to have transferable skills. And so you can't just expect to relocate to a market without any transferable skills. So if you want to work if you've been practicing for 5 years, but you're practicing something where your skills aren't transferable, there's no reason for a law firm to hire you. Even if you're from Greece, and I'll just tell you hypothetically, even if you're from Greece, and I'm not trying to be rude here because I know this is difficult, and you want to relocate to the United States, the first thing people would tell you to do is they would say, oh, go get an LLM, which is a graduate degree in law. Then that will give you the ability to take the bar exam in different states. Most people choose New York or California. Then once you take the bar, you want to try to find a job. But again, it's not easy. It's extremely hard for people coming out of LLM programs to find a job. Most of them try to find a job at these big firms, like this firm or these firms. But law firms are very nervous because if they hire someone from Greece, the person's from another country, they don't have any local connections, they could leave, and all sorts of things. So that makes it difficult. So just as it goes for everyone, this is recorded, so hopefully maybe other people will see this, but the question is, how does a foreign lawyer get a job in the US? In the US. So that's the question. So first thing, you should go get an LLM. That's one. Then you take the bar. Then you can apply to jobs if you want, but you're probably not going to have a lot of luck. You can apply to smaller firms and have some luck. Then you need to get a work visa. I don't even know how that works. You get a green card, I don't know what it's called, but you get some sort of work visa, typically sponsored by the employer. Because I've done that for people before, typically sponsored by employer. And then after you get your work visa, then you can work. But the point is that this route is very difficult. So you can do that. And the problem with these LLM programs is they might charge, I don't know how much they charge, but they're expensive. They might charge like $100,000 or something or more. It's just crazy. And they don't offer, not in this 1 year, I don't think they give scholarships or anything. There's probably cheaper ones. These are most of them. And you take the bar, pass the bar, and then you can apply to jobs in the US, wherever you want to work. If you apply to small firms, then you might be able to get a position. You might even be able to get a position in some cases for 1 year. Some big firms, very difficult. And then if you apply to smaller firms, you'll often have luck. What I would do, a lot of times if you're, like, say you're from Greece, I would find firms with Greek people in it, or owned by Greek people, because there's going to be some potentials there, firms with Greek people in them. That's how I would do it, or something, but it doesn't have to be that way. I'm just saying that people that would be like your situation. But this route works maybe, I don't know, 5%, 10% of the time. It's difficult. I don't know why it's so difficult, but if you were to go be very aggressive doing this, you potentially could get even 100. The issue is, how many places are you applying to? It's going to be very difficult for you many times to get into the largest firms because it's just too much of a risk for them. And they're going to prefer people that are born in the US and may have contacts and have worked here, but how many places you apply? Okay, so there's that. So that's one route, but the smartest thing to do really is and this is how things can work better, is you get your LLM, you take the bar and pass the bar, and then what you do, this is actually, most people don't understand this, preferred route, is then you can do that, but then you actually go and get a USJD, which is actually a bar, which is the same that American attorneys have. And then you don't have to take the bar then, you can do it potentially later. And once you get a USJD, then the reason that's good is because it shows how well you do competing with the US people on an 11 level playing field. So what does that mean? It means that an LLM, pretty much everyone gets good grades. There's not really a lot of competition there. But if you get a USJD, there's you're ranked and et cetera. And then after you get that, you either take the bar, where you typically take the bar, and then you apply to jobs. So that's really the smartest way to do it. This works. This is then apply to jobs. And this is what people do that end up that do the best. So it doesn't mean you're going to get a job in a major market, but I see some of the funniest stuff sometimes. I was talking to someone that did this route that was from, I don't know, Cambodia or something, just not like China, just some Cambodia or something like that. And I was talking to him, and his resume was like, he was working in some sort of like Midwestern farming town in Kansas or something, representing farmers. This is very funny, and he ended up moving to a larger market, but it's just, you have to, this is the route that people need to take. I don't know why no one's ever written an article about this, but I probably should. But this is how most people end up that are from foreign countries. This is really the preferred route. So having a JD just is much different than an LLM. An LLM is just, it's just like it doesn't really, it gets you, it makes you eligible to take the bar in the US, which is actually a really good thing, but it's not something that is really going to distinguish you. And as a foreign attorney, it's just, even if you go to Harvard or whatever, it's not that important. You have to get the JD to get ahead. And I've been doing this for a quarter of a century, and I don't know why anybody never talks about this. I really should write an article about it, but you need to get the JD really after your LLM to have a better chance of getting employed. Oh, okay. Let me just hear. So I'm a second year patent prosecutor looking to relocate. Do you have any suggestions? So what I would do, yes, you can get a job in California, but the California bar is difficult. So just understand with California, without the bar, firms are terrified of hiring you. So why is that? It's just the reason that law firms are so scared of hiring people without the bar is because so many people come to California, or they come to the US, they move firms from one firm to California, and they take the bar and they don't pass. So the pass rate, I don't know what it is, but it's way below 50%. And it's even harder if you're already an attorney. It's just like this really hard bar exam. It's not that you have to be smart to pass it. You just have to work really hard studying. And that's a nightmare. And unlike a lot of other bars, you can't waive in if you have a certain amount of experience. So if you don't have the bar in California, the law firms are just completely terrified of hiring you. Now, that doesn't mean you can't prosecute patents and that sort of thing, but law firms just don't like it. Now, patent attorney with a computer science background, the nice thing about being a patent attorney is that you can pretty much work anywhere. California may be off limits, and Florida may be a little bit off limits unless you take the bar, because of low pass rates. But you can get a job anywhere. What's so cool about patent prosecution is there are so many like small firms that do patent prosecution. There's firms that could be in Long Island, New York, that are 3 people that are doing patents for Amazon or Microsoft. There's so many patent firms out there. It's incredible. And they all have needs for people. So it used to be, there's a whole history of what happened to patent prosecution firms. It used to be that there were some big firms that did only patent prosecution. And what happened is a lot of those firms got absorbed by bigger firms, but they also couldn't compete. So large firms now with patent prosecution are interesting, because what happens with them is they have to charge, they charge hourly rates. And so that scares everyone away. It scares people away. And so they charge hourly rates, which scares people away. So there's that. And so a lot of times patent prosecution doesn't scare, but it scares a lot of people. I would say it scares a lot of clients away. So what happens is that the people that are getting the work as patent prosecutors, small firms, individuals, et cetera, what they're doing is they charge fixed fees for patents. So they charge fixed fees. And so what that means is that a lot of the work, because the companies want to save money, the companies would rather pay, can be like $300K for a patent, or just something ridiculous, or $300K for a patent, or that's probably way more than it should be. It's $300K for a patent, but these firms might say, we'll do any patent for $40,000 or something. I mean, I don't know what the number is, but I'm just giving you. So people, all the work's going to the smaller firms. What's nice about being a patent prosecutor is you can certainly try to get a job with a large firm, but the large law firms do a lot of patent prosecution. But many times your best option is going to be, when you relocate, to try to find smaller firms that do patent prosecution. In some cases, they're even individuals. Like, I've worked with people that were individuals that had $1 million in business doing patent prosecution for certain types of companies. So I'd recommend, I would try to just look at a lot of firms. The only way you can find these firms a lot of ways, but many times you can just do like a Google search, and for patent prosecution things and wherever you want to work, and you'll see firms that are doing it. Large law firms, by the way, are not doing as much patent prosecution as they used to, because as all these people are starting to charge fixed fees, the clients don't really need to be involved in that anymore, and so that's how that's going. So it's important to understand that. Yes, this question is, let's see, this is a good question. How about becoming a foreclosure attorney or bankruptcy attorney? Yeah, during a slow economy. Yeah, it's important though. Yeah, you can definitely do all that stuff in a slow economy. You can do foreclosure defense, you can do foreclosure, you can do all this, but one of the things is you should go into a practice area that you enjoy or that appeals to you, not just to make money. Enjoy, not just one. So what does that mean? That just means that when you choose the practice area you're going to go into, you go into it based on the fact that it appeals to you, that there's something about it that you like, that you think it's a strong practice area for you. And if you go into something that you like, you're going to see the world and everything you're doing through a much different lens than if you just go in something to make money. I always recommend that everyone try to find a practice area that makes them excited, that appeals to them, that they like. So sometimes people really want to go into, they're really interested in corporate law because they like working with businesses. They're really interested in family law because they like that dynamic. It's just whatever the dynamic is that appeals to you as you look at different practice areas and you can see yourself doing it, it makes you excited. That's what you should do. So here's an example that I'll bring up that I don't know how quite relevant it is, but anytime I was in like college or law school, you always get these, I don't know, they're all online now, but you used to get these books where you could read through what these classes are about and then choose one based on your interest. And one of them might be about, I don't know, how to do, tech transaction, whatever the stuff you're reading that appeals to you and that you liked and that just makes you excited when you're reading about it is the exact sort of practice area you should do. So some people would read about tax law and be like, this sounds horrible. But other people would read about it and be like, wow, that's really cool. And then some people might read about, I don't know, trademark prosecution and read it and be like, oh, that looks really cool. And other people would not. So you just have to think when you're looking at things like, what is it that appeals to you the most and go into it for that reason. Because anytime you do something that you like, you'll make money. You don't have to worry about the money because your enthusiasm for that practice area will be, everyone will pick up on it. Clients will pick up on it. The firm you work with will pick up on it, and you'll go farther. If you pick something you don't like, then you really won't. Law firm owner, a boutique owner, a large market, no reciprocity, leaving my state for 2 years, thinking to open a local office in Connecticut and hired a local attorney there so I don't have to take the bar again. I would then manage the office. Do you know the Connecticut market, Hartford specifically? My firm handles IP. Yeah, I don't, what I would say is in terms of, this is actually a good question. Do I know the Connecticut market? All I know is the types of firms that are interviewing our people. I know where things are strong and slow. I don't know what the rules are of, you can do that. You can hire a local attorney. I know someone with a big personal injury law firm that has a bunch of attorneys working for it, and they want to open an office in another city. And so I think he took the bar, but then everyone else is, I don't know how it works, but yeah, I think it would be smart maybe to hire a local attorney. No, I don't know if you have to take the bar to go into Connecticut, or you can waive in. So I would always look at those requirements when you're trying to move. And yeah, but if you're leaving your state, I don't see why you couldn't. Well, you said no reciprocity, why you couldn't continue to service those clients. Yeah, I don't see any reason why you couldn't. I don't know the laws of professional responsibility and how this works. I'm probably not the best person to answer that. If your question is, could I find you a local attorney to work for you? Of course, that's not people love that sort of stuff. And it's very easy to find most types of attorneys if you want them to work for you, especially if you want someone to be the only attorney in office. So I don't see how difficult that is. How would you find an attorney? You can use a recruiter. It's difficult for a lot of people to understand like how to screen resumes, but if you were to hire someone, whether through a recruiter or many times you can just put ads out on your own, and it doesn't matter how you do it. But the idea would be you want to find someone that has some sort of stability and looks like you're going to stick around, that you have something to offer them, meaning, I don't know, ability to run an office or independence, but you have to have some sort of thing to offer, and then bring someone in that is going to be a good fit for you. But yeah, that's how I would recommend it. I'm sure if I were to look for an attorney for you, I'm sure I could find lots of people that could do it, because it's not anything difficult. Let me see. I answered the patent attorney question. I have one more about opportunities in New Hampshire. Okay, New Hampshire is an interesting state. There's a lot of kind of rural areas, and there's a lot of suburban. Every market has opportunities in it. What I would recommend, anytime you're interested in the market, it's fun. You can search Google for attorneys in your practice area and location. Let me just see here. 1 second. In your practice area and location. Just here. Area and location. And when you do that, it's not that difficult to find people doing the type of work you do. You can find law firms doing it. You can find individuals doing it. So that's what I would look for. When you say opportunities, there's kind of two opportunities. There's job openings, and then there's just places you can apply to. Many times you just apply to. I'm sorry, I'm writing this down. So job openings, what does that mean? That just means that a specific firm has openings, and because of those openings, you apply and hope that you get the job, which is one way of getting a job. It's not always the best way of getting the job. The next way is to find places to apply to. What does that mean? That means that you find firms and that have your practice area, and then also in the location you want to work with, and you apply to them. You just find the person to apply to. Typically, if it's a small firm, you apply to the named partner. If it's a large firm, there's usually recruiting people. If it's a mid-level firm, you find places and you just apply to them, and you say, hey, I'm this type of attorney, I'd like to work there. And this is the way most people, it's a much easier way to get a job than applying to job openings, because when you apply to job openings, you're competing with everyone. And so there's that. All right. Thanks everyone for the questions. And these webinars are very useful. I'll try to do a good topic next week. And thanks for all the questions. And again, the relocation is a very, smart move for anyone's career. I definitely, to the extent you can, I recommend always that people try to relocate, because it definitely can help your career. Now, let me just make sure I don't have any more questions. I think that's it. Thanks everyone. And I will talk to everyone next week. Thanks.